you're audible. We'll just start in a minute and then post introductions, then we can initiate question answers. There are already some questions that I have which were pre-sent by the attendees, so we can take those up as well.
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. We are joined today with the, first of all, thanks for joining in Janiki webinar in the afternoon today. I request you to put yourself on mute, and when you are asking your question, you can definitely unmute yourself and ask the question. Today we are joined with the IIT Guwahati team, and we had a tech talk session last Saturday with the team and Professor Praveen Kumar and Vikas and Mr. Rajendra. And there were a lot of questions that remained unanswered, or a lot of curiosity was still left. And we decided to take this up as a longer session with this webinar today. So we have Praveen Kumar and Vikas on the session today, and we also would like to again remind you that you can ask your questions. You can, Rajendra sir is also there, and you can also put your questions in the chat box. Today, mainly we are focusing on, first of all, understanding what is the motor development process in a nutshell, try to understand what it takes to make a motor. We have not yet seen a successful EV motor come out of India, and I speak this for the entire industry, as we know. So, what is that recipe of development? That is something that we will try to understand more. And the complete architecture when it comes to not just the motor performance on the test bench, but also on the vehicle, along with the gearbox, and how to ensure that we are testing in a manner where the results on the test bed and what we will see in the field is going to match. Optimization and reduction of losses. What does it take? How can we ensure the right thermal architecture is also provided to the motor? Not just the motor, if we take it at the system level, at the entire EV, how do we get energy optimization? Because ultimately in Indian market, it is the operating cost and how much mileage and how much range it is going to give that is going to be the right seller. With the motor itself, yes, it is very possible to achieve 85% plus efficiencies consistently. But then at a vehicle level, that's not the same thing. So that's one more thing we'll like to understand. And then also talk about, there are various industry members here who would like to interact in a project format with the IIT Guwahati e-mobility lab, and we would like to understand more about that. So to begin with, I would request Praveen Kumar and his team to give a quick introduction before we start with our question answer. Praveen sir.
Hello, so it's good day to everyone. I hope I am audible.
Yes,
Is my sound clear? Okay. So I am Praveen Kumar, and currently I am a professor in the Department of EEE here at IIT Guwahati, and I have been working with EV technologies since the year 2000. So it's been almost 21 years. So my first work started with hybrid electric vehicles when the Toyota Prius was launched, and we were investigating that machine back in Germany. So after working for 10 years in the automobile industry in Germany, I moved to India in 2009 and joined IIT Guwahati. And since then, I am here. And in IIT Guwahati, we founded the e-mobility lab in 2009 to start some initial research on electric vehicles. And yeah, since then we have been continuing our research work. Thank you.
Mr. Rajendra?
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rajendra Kumar, and I'm currently doing my PhD at IIT Guwahati, and my topic of research is uh, design of induction motors and minimization of losses, various losses in uh, induction motors. And prior to joining for PhD, I was working in Marwadi University for 3 years. As an assistant professor, and before that, I worked in PM Dimensions Private Limited, a company where I worked for commissioning of different uh, electrical equipment for a 500 megawatt nuclear reactor.
We cannot hear, Shekhar. It's not clear.
One second. Rajendra sir, there is some noise which is coming.
Is it clear now?
Yeah, this is better.
Okay, sir. Let me introduce myself again. I am Rajendra Kumar, and I am working towards my PhD in electrical engineering in e-mobility lab, IIT Guwahati. And my work is focused on analysis of various losses in induction machine and design of an induction machine. And prior to joining here, joining this PhD program, I was working in Marwadi University. There I worked for 3 years, and before that I worked in PM Dimensions Private Limited for commissioning of electrical equipment, and there I worked for 2 years.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Vikash?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Vikas Shah. I'm a PhD candidate at Electric Mobility Lab in the Department of Electronics and Electrical Engineering at IIT Guwahati. I have joined at 2015, and since 2015, I have been working in different aspects of electric vehicle. Let it be the grid integration, or in the powertrain, or in the battery side regarding charging. So during this period of my stay at IIT Guwahati, I have developed my core areas of expertise in research and development, innovation, as well as in the academia as well regarding the teaching side. I have extensively worked in designing, prototyping, and controlling power electronics converter for EV drivetrain and chargers during my PhD. Apart from that, I have also gained experience in designing intelligent controllers for V2G system, lithium-ion battery electrochemical modeling, it's simulation, and finding out how the degradation happens in the battery, implementing different charging techniques, and finding out which charging technique is better for fast charge, as well as reducing the battery degradation. So with this talk, I'm really thankful to Sekhar sir for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to speaking to a wide audience regarding different queries that we have with respect to the Electric Mobility Lab working. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Vikash. The first question I have is for Mr. Praveen. Praveen sir, last time when we were at in the Tech Talk, and there was a question about which is the most suitable motor for India. I think you were leaning towards the induction motor. Now, when it comes to comparison on the efficiency level against IPM, the induction motor does have some disadvantage according to what we see material in the open domain. And that can be compensated with thermal management, but it does add cost on the overall system. So from a price perspective, what do you see is the best option? And with induction motor, are you saying across the board it is suitable, or the answer differs from application to application?
Well, let me answer this question. So I hope my voice is clear.
Yes.
Yeah, so the first thing is that regarding the efficiency. Now, efficiency comparison is actually a widely misunderstood concept. When we talk about EV applications, we have to keep in mind there is no one single operating point. Rather, there is a torque versus speed characteristics or a power versus speed characteristics. So when we talk about efficiency, we have to look at the efficiency maps of the machine over a wide range of torque and speed requirements. And then we have to look at a representative drive cycle on which we expect the vehicle to operate on. For example, if it's a two-wheeler, definitely it's a city vehicle. It won't be on highways most of the time. Mostly one would be driving them in a city traffic condition, which involves frequent start stops. So that means we would need a motor which has a relatively high efficiency in the region of low speed, high torque region, because frequent start stop and low traffic and high traffic density means you're driving at lower speeds, torque requirements are higher, there are some potholes and so on, so there would be sudden inrush currents, and things like that will keep on happening. So we need to see that where do the operating point demands lie on the efficiency map. And then we have to compare the efficiencies. So comparing at one operating point is a misnomer that leads to wrong conclusions. Now, if I compare the induction motor and the PM motor, one thing is clear that if we go for state of the art induction motor technology, which means we go for copper cast rotors, not the classical rotors with aluminum bars or copper bars, but rather casted rotors, then the efficiency of these machines is extremely high. And the advantage is that since copper is a very good conductor of heat as well, so the cooling of the rotor can be done by forced air cooling. The stator can be cooled conventionally with liquid cool techniques for bigger motors, but even the rotor can be cooled very easily. So when we go for copper cast induction rotors, then the efficiencies of PM machines and induction machines are almost comparable. Plus we have a cost advantage because the rare earth magnets are extremely expensive compared to the copper. So the challenge here is how do we make induction motors for two-wheeler applications, because there we mostly use hub motors. So today, most of the hub motor technology is based on PM machines because these are outer rotor machines. But here in our lab, we have even designed one hub induction motor. It's in the experimental phase. So after 2-3 prototypes, I think we would get even that also properly. So technically, there is no reason why we can't use induction motors across the board over a wide range of power. And the other important thing which I would also like to mention is that if we go for bigger motors, say 150, 200 kilowatt motors for bus applications, large bus applications, then handling bigger magnets for such kind of large motors becomes difficult. An induction motor definitely is easier to manufacture. And there definitely is a cost advantage. Now, one area of challenge which is with induction motor is control, speed control. Okay, so even that is now being researched, and there are possible solutions, vector control solutions, which are which can be used very effectively in induction motors as well. So I think with time, I don't see any reason why induction motors should be seen as inferior to permanent magnet motors. So all this misconception comes because we compare them at one single operating point, and that's what we should not be doing. So I hope I could answer that question.
Yes, Praveen sir. Now, when you say a lot, is dependent on the controller as well and the control methodology. So the ultimate goal is not to just find the right motor. The goal is to find the right motor plus motor controller plus the control methodology. Would that be fair to say?
That is perfectly fair to say, and I would also add that it's not just the control algorithm, but also the configuration of the power electronic converters. So we have proved it very well here in our experiments and with various prototypes, that if we have, let's say, a city application where we have dense traffic, okay, so a drivetrain with a battery, a DC-DC converter, an inverter, and a motor. So this configuration gives overall higher efficiency from battery to the wheel compared to if you have just a battery, inverter, and motor. Okay. Now here again, people say that, oh, converter, DC-DC converter has an efficiency of 90%, inverter has an efficiency of 90%, so that makes it 80% overall efficiency of the power electronics. But then again, we are multiplying them at one operating point, the efficiencies. But if you see over the spectrum of operating points, okay, the overall efficiency of the system becomes better. So that's the point that we will have to keep in mind. So we should never ever compare or talk with one operating point, but operating region or maps.
So, Praveen sir, that is a very good point that you bring out, and that is, I say, at odds with what we are learning in theory. In the sense that the way we are learning it, it says that at least the prime motive power going to the motor should be the at the same voltage at that of the battery, thereby avoiding a DC-DC converter in the loop for exactly the reason that you were mentioning. In in the same terms, do you think that the DC-DC would play a better role if the motor was a induction motor versus the EM motor?
I think it will play. Our experimental results are based on induction motor, but if we do the theoretical analysis, it would be the same conclusion even for PM machines. Well, I said it makes sense to use a DC-DC converter when we are looking at city traffic conditions, okay? Because there you need higher torques. Sometimes you need to bring down the voltage and you have to have a higher current. So keeping a constant voltage input to the inverter is not a very good idea. So you have to reduce the voltage that goes to the inverter, and eventually the inverter gives a lower voltage to the motor. So we have to take all this into account. If you're looking at highway driving, let's say you're looking at intercity bus application kind of a thing. So in that case, putting in a DC-DC converter in between does not bring in much. So it really depends on what application are we looking at. So that understanding is very, very essential.
Yeah. Praveen sir, if you can switch on your camera, that may be
the bandwidth will
better.
go down because
Yeah,
there are
let's try it. Let's try it
oh,
if it
I'll
works.
try to do that because uh, there are three other PCs working online here at home. So let me see
Okay,
if I can.
that's fine. That's
I'll
fine.
try that because all the schools are also online, so there are.
Right, right. Yeah, understood. So we have one of our esteemed members, our global member, Mr. Michael Durasek. He's on the call. and his question is, why is copper the only conductor used in EV motors?
Oh, the reason is because of very low resistivity or very high conductivity. We can use aluminium, we can use alloys of copper and aluminium, but then the resistivity would increase. So higher resistivity means we are just creating more losses, and more losses translate to more heat, and heat extraction is a problem, and also it reduces the overall efficiency of the motor. So to avoid I square R losses, we try to use copper conductors.
Can I butt in there? Because
Yes, Michael. Yeah,
go
ahead.
There was a reason why I asked that question in such a simple form, and I received the answer that I expected to receive, but we have been researching particularly the use of aluminium in hairpin motors, and hairpin motors, the conductors in hairpin motors are subject to both DC and AC losses, and of course are applied to an electric vehicle operating a particular type of drive cycle. And we found that the difference, if you replace copper with aluminium with no other change in a motor that's up around the 150 kilowatt stage in a four-wheel domestic passenger vehicle, you lose about 0.35% of efficiency in the one we studied, and when you investigate what that does to the range, it might only remove a few kilometres of a 400 kilometre range, and it saves a lot of money. The other thing is that aluminium is considered to be a greener material than copper, in that its manufacturing processes are less damaging to the environment. So my question was really more of, did you know that for a...
No, I was not aware of that. Yeah, your point is correct that aluminium is more environment friendly compared to copper. But if we go for more recycling, then I think the environmental impact of producing recycled copper would be much lesser. So, yeah.
I mean, environmental issues are peculiar, but
Yeah.
manufacturing copper damages the water and produces chemicals that are dangerous to human health, and then a couple of other things. I mean, there are a few studies done on it, but the real one is that it's much cheaper.
Yeah, that's true. Aluminium is much cheaper.
And copper has been increasing. The amount of copper in one of these motors is double the cost of the magnets. They're close to $100 worth of copper and around $50 worth of permanent magnets in an IPM 150 or maybe 200 kilowatt motor. So we're quite interested in talking about this with people who'd like to talk about it.
That's an interesting thing. If we can replace aluminium, if we can replace copper by aluminium, it's always good without a big compromise on the efficiency.
And hairpin motors are becoming very common in EV applications. Not sure in two-wheelers. We haven't really looked at anything to do with small motors or lower voltage motors. But our first look at this says maybe copper is not the right conductor choice. A bit like the question with induction motors, is copper or which is the best conductor for the squirrel cage? Is a very complicated question. This one is not very complicated. You just simply put in aluminium and save money and lose a little bit of range.
So that's interesting. I think it's worth investigating as well, definitely.
I have a paper I can share.
Oh, that would be great.
If anyone wants to have a look at it. And,
Yeah. We would like to have it.
But what you said was correct. In other words, if it's all to do with DC, if it's wire wound, copper is correct, almost certainly. But once you move to this hairpin style and start to include all of the AC losses, so your simulation has to be very, very exact. You see, you get this surprising result that aluminium is not as bad as you would expect.
Yeah, in hairpin we increase the cross-section area, so eventually the resistance difference between copper and aluminium for a given hairpin coil won't be much different. Yeah, I agree.
Well, you don't change the size. You leave it exactly the same. But you're right. The hairpin is a big conductor.
Yeah.
So DC losses become less important.
That's
and
true.
The DC losses in a drive cycle are very small compared to the rest of the losses, being the iron losses. The iron losses dominate the losses in any case in a drive cycle. Same sort of observation that a induction motor may, in a drive cycle, may perform better than an IPM motor once you run the drive cycle correctly and don't just look at its maximum efficiency, for instance. Its maximum efficiency has not much to do with it at all. But two-wheelers are tricky because they do operate low speed, high torque a lot, I think. Anyway, that's just something that we would like to discuss with Indian motor manufacturers or designers, as we think, because India, of all the places in the world, is very good at making things cheaply, because it has to. Yeah. Okay,
so there's a follow-up question on this. When we talk about aluminium versus copper, what does it do to the weight of the motor? Does the weight of the motor reduce significantly when we look at aluminium as an option?
For a 150 kilowatt motor, you reduce from about 7 or 8 kilograms of copper to 2 kilograms of aluminium. So you save, I think, a little bit over 5 kilograms. That gets reflected also in the range in a very small way, but offsets some of the range loss associated with the swap. Even that tiny, because you're now dealing with very small numbers. You're dealing with very fractions of a percent, and it's probably getting more theoretical than real, but it's still real. 5 kilograms is still a real reduction in weight. 5 kilograms of battery will give you 40 kilometers of range, whereas and we're dealing with a loss of range of 2 or 3 kilometers. So you don't have to, even if you put in more battery, but we're saying for some of these big OEMs, the ability to tell their consumers that they're using a greener material can be more significant than anything. And there is an opinion. I mean, we were talking to Volvo about this, and Volvo are very interested in the environmental credentials of aluminium in the motor, whereas really you're doing it to save money. And the Chinese, of course, have always done it to save cost and pretend that the motor's just as good. The insulation is still brown to make it look like copper. But they use aluminium in cheaper motors that are operating on low duty cycles. So to some extent, aluminium has a bad name because people know that Chinese companies cheat on the windings and you end up with a motor that fails earlier than one with copper. But once you're dealing with liquid cooled motors, these thermal issues become different, I think, than an industrial motor, particularly in India where it's much hotter.
Yeah.
And you know, the motor comes from China where it works okay in a cold climate, goes to India and fails after 1 or 2 years, and the Chinese motor gets a reputation for not being as good.
Yeah.
Okay, but yes,
Secondly,
5 or 6 kilograms.
We'll come back to the life of the motor very soon. Let us continue on the performance side. So, Praveen sir, the next question is about this motor technology, which is switched reluctance motor. Has been a lot of talk and debate, and especially the ability to take it in a pancake type of arrangement for hub motors. Seems like it has the benefits without the magnet and without the heating challenges of the induction motor. It seems to have both things favoring it. So what do you see as the future for switched reluctance motor, and why are we not talking about it?
No, we certainly are talking about switch reluctance motors. There is no doubt in that. The biggest challenge with the switch reluctance motor still is the torque pulsation. So we want a smoother torque, and that is still a challenge, and that has to be overcome by design. The other important thing we have to keep in mind is that switch reluctance motor is a singly excited machine. You have only one excitation. Okay. Now, when you have a singly excited system, exclusively singly excited system, then the power factor tends to be poor. So you have to feed in a lot of reactive power, and that reactive power has to come from the inverter, and that creates stresses, the voltage stresses on the inverter. So that's the reason why for applications like in EV, where each watt of power comes from battery, which is expensive in terms of weight. Okay, so we don't want to have poorer power factor. We want machines with higher power factor, ideally power factor 1. So that's the reason why switch reluctance motors, they are potential candidates, but until and unless we find ways to improve the torque pulsation and improve the power factor and also get a good control, it is difficult. Moreover, for at low speeds, they are very bad. Okay, the torque output is very bad. They're very good at higher speeds. So if we look at Indian traffic conditions in cities, we are mostly at low speeds. We hardly go beyond 30 kilometers per hour. So it's not a very viable solution for the vehicles that we use in our country. So that's the only reason that I can see so far.
But most of these challenges that you're mentioning, they can be handled by the new age power electronics, right? We can do some corrections in the inverter and power electronics, some active control to get rid of these pulsations.
Yes, that we can do, but the low torque output at low speeds is something which is the inherent property of the machine itself. So that can't be corrected by power electronics. And that's a primary requirement for Indian driving conditions.
Okay. Okay. Then we have a question from Mr. Kunal, specific to the EVs. We have a lot of ohmic losses due to the skin and eddy currents in the stator coil. Can you elaborate more on that and how optimization can be done to reduce these ohmic losses?
Yeah, well, one of the solutions is, as we were discussing, so hairpin coil is a solution. Okay, so they do reduce the ohmic losses. And apart from that, if we are going for coils, the conductor based windings, then yeah, we have to pay attention to the copper size as well, the conductor diameter. So the rule of thumb would be a higher diameter is always better in terms of ohmic losses, but then higher diameter results in lower fill factor. So we have to make a trade-off between the fill factor for the slot and the conductor diameter. So yeah, lower fill factor would be that the machine becomes bigger, it becomes bulkier. So yeah, there is always a trade-off. There is no one answer which can meet all the requirements. So if we reduce the ohmic losses by using a thicker conductor in a coil-wound machine, then we have to go for a lower fill factor. We have to settle for a lower fill factor. The machine would be bigger. But if you want a more compact machine, then the resistance would go up. We need to have a better cooling. So it's always a trade-off involved.
Okay, Kunal, does this answer your question, or are you looking for something more specific?
No, it answers perfectly. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Praveen, Kunal has one more question. Kunal, would you like to ask that?
Yes, please. So the question was regarding in the last session you indicated the issues that that are faced by having an induction motor and as well as a permanent magnet motors. So can you elaborate that the new motors that are now being introduced, that the synchronous reluctance motor? You just not talked about switch reluctance motor. There is another one called the synchronous reluctance motor, and also the permanent magnet assisted synchronous reluctance motor. So are they gaining traction in this field? And are you doing some work on this also? Thank you.
Yeah, we are working on synchronous reluctance motors. So if we talk about synchronous reluctance motors without magnets, then they again have the same problem like the switch reluctance motor, which is they are singly excited, so the power factor would be lower. But if we use permanent magnet assisted synchronous reluctance motors, then yeah, we can improve the power factor and they start to become better. So the control for permanent magnet assisted synchronous reluctance motor would be more or less same as interior permanent magnet synchronous machine. So there is no difference between the two from the point of operation or the behavior. So PM assisted synchronous reluctance motors definitely are a viable solution, and we certainly are working on that. So I hope I could answer the question.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then Rushi Raj, can you ask your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for giving opportunity. My question is, what are the voltage levels that are used in various electric vehicles? Like, what are the optimum voltages for two-wheelers, for three-wheelers, and for four-wheelers? As we are seeing that voltages are, there is a trend to increase the voltage, operating voltage of the motor as well as the battery. So how do you see this trend, and what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, for two-wheelers, the voltage limit is 72 volts for the battery pack, so we don't go beyond that due to safety reasons. For four-wheelers, we go up to 400 volts. For buses and so on, it's 800 volts. So that's the range of voltages that we work with. The rule of thumb, which I understand, is a higher voltage motor is always better because see, power is voltage into current, roughly speaking, in a very simplistic way. So if you have higher voltage, the current would be lower. So if you have lower current, then the need for a thicker cross section goes down. So the idea is that try to keep the voltage as high as possible, okay, without compromising the safety. So from that point of view, for two-wheelers, we go up to 72 volts, for four-wheelers up to 400, and for buses up to 800, or maybe more in near future. So I hope I could answer the question.
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more doubt. If I use a 48 volts battery and a 72 volts motor, and in between I boost the voltage by DC-DC converter, how do you see this option in electric vehicles?
Yeah, it would depend again, as I said, on the driving conditions. So we have to do the analysis for the drive cycle, which we expect the vehicle to experience in real world. So if the overall efficiency for the drive cycle is high enough or acceptable, then one should go for that. Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
So, Sabha, do you want to ask your question? Sabha, are you there? Okay, so I'll just ask that. So, Praveen, what is the peak and average efficiency of the drive which is present in industry applications today?
Oh, industry application, if you see, then for the best of the motors, it goes beyond 90%. But that's almost virtually impossible to achieve for EVs. So the efficiency from battery to the wheel for EVs would be around 65%. I would be extremely happy if we touch 70%. Because here
That's on a drive cycle, you're saying, on the
yeah,
drive cycle.
yeah, because the torques are not constant, the speeds are not constant, they keep on changing. So for a driving cycle, 70% would be an excellent number to achieve.
Okay. And there's a question. Can you comment on the current and power consumption, also in terms of efficiency?
Uh, I couldn't really get the question. So for what kind of an application?
Yeah, Dipesh, can you do you want to talk more about the specific application that you have this question about?
Yeah, maybe elaboration. So I was talking about this classification of motors. So which motor has, maybe I got to know that, okay, different torque and at different points the efficiency changes. But overall, if you see the design of motors and the concept of motor, so which one will be better to use in which application? So maybe like, let's say truck, what we will use, and for two-wheelers, what is the best solution
Yeah.
in terms of current or maybe power consumption?
You see, from the power consumption point of view, on the induction motors and the PM motors are almost identical, as we discussed earlier. For two-wheelers, it's predominantly PM machines because we have hub PM machines that are easily available. So once we master the technology to make compact hub induction motors, then they will give a tough competition to the PM machines. For bigger vehicles, induction machines are easier to manufacture because the magnet size would be smaller. So handling issues with the magnets would be won't be there in case of induction machines. For mid-range vehicles, like we have four-wheelers, so the motor ranges would be anywhere between 40 to 60, 70 kilowatt. So in that, both the motors are a viable solution. So it really depends on what the supply chain of the OEMs are. So if they have a very good, healthy, robust magnet supply chain, then go ahead with that, not a problem. But yeah, if you are starting fresh, then I would say that don't neglect the induction motor. They are as good as PM machines. So that would be my answer to the question.
Yeah. Praveen sir, like let's say a 20 kilowatt application, if we are looking for a motor for that, what would be the weight comparison between induction motor and PM motor for the same power output?
Yeah, so we have been working on a project which we call as high power density and high torque density machines. So in our lab, we designed three motors. They were all 11.5 or 12 kilowatt machines, rated power. Okay, the peak power was around 24 or 26 kilowatts. So for these machines, the kind of power, the torque power density ratings we got were 6 kilowatt per kilogram. So we designed a PM machine, an induction machine, and also a synchronous reluctance machine. And all three of them had around 6 kilowatt per kilogram. So they were almost identical. So it really depends on how you design the lamination, how you optimize the flux utilization inside the machine, how you minimize the flux leakage, sorry. So that all governs on how the weight of the machines would be. So it's really possible to get almost identical range of power densities for any kind of a machine topology. So it's all a matter of designing the lamination.
Praveen sir, you bring a very interesting thing into picture. You're saying there is a lot of optimization that needs to happen and lot of design elements and the things that can be done at stages. At the same time, in India today, I'll tell you what the situation is. Indian tier ones. See, okay, let's take it step by step. Indian OEMs were sleeping with Frame One, and they did not energize Indian research into motors during the Frame One rollout. Indian tier ones were happy with the way things were going on, and they did not do any research on their own in advance. And now they are looking to provide a motor to their OEMs within 6 months. There is no motor that is available to be taken to the market in 6 months. There are very good startups and motor companies that have been working in this field, but obviously wherever they are 1 year, 1.5 years away because they are yet to go through this optimization process. They have the first design right, but it is not optimized to the application. It is not optimized to reduce the losses. So what is that ideal time of development of a motor that can go into series production? What is that time that is required according to you?
Well, my experience has shown that once we get the very high level specification from any customer or user that I need a motor for such and such application, to a highly optimized machine which is prototyped and has undergone the first series of tests would need around 18 to 20 months. And now that's the time frame which people do not want to invest in. And they do forget that once you invest those 20 months, you can produce 20,000 of those motors for coming 5 to 6 years. Every year you can produce hundreds and thousands of them for your vehicle. So it's not a big investment of time. The thing is that we need a solution immediately, and it never happens. And I might add here, one of the biggest impediment to our success is how to say that. I mean, we pride on our jugaad technology, but that's a dirty word. Okay, there is no jugaad in real life. It has to be a thoroughly thought through design. We take unnecessary pride on that. We glorify it, which is wrong, and that's why we are nowhere. That's the story. That's my opinion on it.
So, yeah, so that is very true because we were talking about some of these companies who have launched electric two-wheelers primarily as an importer. They get in kits from China and they deploy it in the field. And we talked about, what is the reliability of the motor and how do you ensure. And they said, well, the only thing we have to say is that in every kit we get not one but two motors. So whenever it fails, we have the other one to replace, and that is part of the original kit itself. What we are saying is there is instead of investing in the quality or thinking about quality and lifetime of the motor, the thought is just change it and move on because it's already covered in the same.
So, you see,
yeah.
yeah, no,
Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to add one thing. We have never invested money in fundamental research and development. It's true for the entire spectrum of technologies, not just EV technologies, to create our own know why. We pay a lot of attention to know how. Okay, but for me, know why is more important than know how. Know how comes much later. So developing know how is a game of patience. It's a risky game. You invest 10 crores, maybe you would get one project which is successful. So that risk for appetite for risk should also be there. But out of 100, if two projects succeed, then they will pay off for the 98 failures. That's always been the case worldwide, that's true. But here we don't do that. We want success in each and every project that we execute. So at the end of the day, we do not execute anything. And we have the status quo where we import everything from low cost countries. That's the story that we have.
There's a question from Kuntal. What is the percentage torque ripple which is acceptable for BLDC motor?
That depends on applications. So if we are talking about two-wheelers where the machines are hub motors and they are directly in touch with the road, so in that case we cannot have a very high torque ripple because the driver would feel that. But if we are looking at frame-mounted machines, so the torque ripples can be higher, and I think I can happily live with anything under 10%. So that would be my benchmark figure. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So 10% would be my benchmark figure.
Okay. Okay. Thiru, do you want to ask your question? We have Thiru from Ampere Vehicles who has a question.
Thanks, Shekhar. Dr. Praveen, thank you very much. I handle the technology at Ampere and we have interacted earlier also. The efficiency is a very, very big opportunity that we are looking at. Clearly, you mentioned 60 to 70%. We are looking at roughly about 62% is what we are seeing with the motors that we are currently using. From what we take out of the battery to what we get as mechanical energy at the wheel, we use hub motors. You are absolutely right about the Indian drive conditions. In fact, we have developed our own drive cycle working with our customers because whatever is used by ARAI seems to be too generous.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have developed that, and that's really helpful. The way we are looking at efficiency is if we can improve efficiency from 60% to 70%, it allows us to use a smaller battery and therefore the same range for a lower cost to our customers, which is the biggest cost opportunity that we see. What is the amount of efficiency that we can expect to achieve? You know, take 20 months, 24 months, the amount of research that we do. Theoretically, what is the maximum efficiency that we think we can achieve with a hub-mounted motor with any of the technologies that we are working at? Thank you.
You see, thanks, Thiru. So we did some initial analysis. I would say they are mostly back of the envelope calculations. So my gut feeling is that for hub motors, under no circumstances, we would get efficiency for the entire drivetrain, that is battery to the wheel, more than 72, 73%. So that's the upper limit that I see, because for two-wheeler applications, the voltage levels are lower and the driving conditions are extremely demanding. So in a real world, 72, 73%, if we just squeeze out every watt of energy, then maybe 75 is the ceiling that we can hit.
That is still very good. That is a 20% improvement from the 60% that we're currently seeing, which is about a 17% reduction in battery, and that's huge.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So That would need a lot of optimization, lot of careful design, lot of analysis, but that would be the ceiling. So if we can achieve that, then yeah, I would be very happy.
You mentioned low speeds, high torque. That is definitely one of the cases that we see. Another interesting case that we see is whenever we are able to get to higher speeds, if it's a 45, 50 kilometers per hour on the road, you see that most of our customers are driving at 10% throttle, 50% throttle at the most. So again, there the efficiencies are much lower. If you are driving at full throttle, even at higher speeds, you get good efficiency, but you really don't get to drive there. You tend to go at half throttle. So very interesting. I do not know if you have looked at that, if there is any ideas on the motor design where at half throttle you'll be able to get better efficiencies.
Actually, we have been thinking on this problem, and my idea is that we should actually go for the design in the reverse order. So first we should look at what is the desired torque versus speed characteristic.
Right.
Then we should see what is the desired efficiency map that we want.
Right.
And then we should go for the design to achieve those desired efficiency maps and characteristics. So
theoretically, that's possible. There are opportunities.
It is possible. We are trying to formalize that problem because it's an inverse design problem. In mathematics, we say inverse problem. So it's challenging because there are too many unknowns when we go with the inverse problem. To some extent, we have addressed that issue. I think very soon we will find out a way where it can be formalized that you give in the desired characteristics and we get a design which meets that characteristics, and it could be done a bit faster. So that's the challenge.
I will come back to you, Professor, one-on-one on this. I would very much like to discuss further with you. One other question that I had sent is a discussion on controller design. You alluded to that you may have to change the power electronics design of controllers also. Can you talk a little bit more on the controller design? I'm going to go on mute. Thank you.
Yeah. So when I say controller, so I divide that into two parts. One is the hardware part, which is the power electronic converters, and the other one is the control algorithm itself. So what we have seen is that if we use both the DC-DC and DC to AC converters for city traffic conditions, then the overall efficiency of the drivetrain is higher. And that's the result that we have, experimental results that we have for induction machines. So, and the other important thing is we definitely will have to use vector control, and we try to use direct torque control in our application, which is a category of vector control. So scalar controls should be completely ruled out if anyone is thinking about using simple scalar control or V by F control for the machines. So that won't work. It will bring down the efficiency of the machine quite down. We won't get the desired speed ranges. So we have to go for vector control, if possible, the direct torque control. So that's my take on that.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thirup, for sharing some insights into the application as well. Thanks for being, proactive in that way. So, Praveen sir, the next question I have is mainly talking about, you mentioned the efficiency for the hub motor. What would be the peak point for a mid-drive motor? Like, would that 73 change a lot, or would that also end up at 73%?
You see, expecting anything more than 75% is extremely difficult because of the way the drivetrain is configured. So we have losses at many parts of the entire drivetrain, right from battery to the wheel. So for me, my understanding is that 75% is kind of a ceiling for any kind of an electric drivetrain that we are looking at. Achieving beyond that, I don't know. I mean, because we have to see the entire system when we talk about efficiency. So maybe if you have a better cooling mechanism, then the cooling system will consume some energy. So we have to take that into account. So getting beyond 75%, to my mind, would be extremely difficult, if not impossible.
Praveen sir, I would like to change the thought process right now from a two-wheeler to a three-wheeler, especially like L5 category of three-wheeler, which is in very fast mode of electrification, if we may say it. Have you done any projects and work at the vehicle level in the three-wheeler, and what is your experience with efficiency and challenges with the gearbox and drivetrain integration?
Yeah. So for three-wheelers, we have designed 3.5 kilowatt motors, both PM and induction motors as well. We haven't tried a synchronous reference motor yet. So the biggest challenge for two-wheelers and as well as for three-wheelers is that people have a misconception that we can have a lot of regeneration, but that's not true. Okay, because regenerative braking again is a very tricky thing, and if we can recover 14 to 15% of kinetic energy and convert that back into electrical energy and put into the battery, would be a great achievement. So the biggest challenge with two-wheelers and three-wheelers is actually that how do we get a very high overall efficiency, because these vehicles by their inherent nature don't operate at very high speeds. They are low speed vehicles and they drive in city traffic. They experience a lot of start stop. And one important thing which we have to keep in mind is the kind of abuse these vehicles undergo. So if you launch a two-wheeler for two people, there would be three people sitting on that, plus some luggage. Or people would carry 3 or 4 gas cylinders on them, okay, which it's not designed for. So such kind of abuse means your machines are always in overloaded condition, which would bring down the efficiency. So how do we address the use aspect or the behavioral aspects of the driver? So even that has to be taken into account when we are designing. So the machines tend to be a bit oversized. That brings down the efficiency further because it has to meet to the requirements of the customer. So I mean, the problem is very complex. It's not just an ideal scenario that I design a vehicle for 3 people or 5 people, and that's the maximum number that I would expect. So it could be 1.5 times to even twice the number. Okay, so the overloading is immense, and that is also something which the designers have to keep in mind for the success of their product in the market.
Yeah. Okay. We have a question from Mr. Krishnendu Haldar. You want to ask your question?
Good afternoon, Praveen sir. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Praveen sir, yes. I'm Krishnendu Haldar from Yes Bank. So basically wanted to understand that if any new motor player particularly wants to enter and try to manufacture EV motors, then what are the machineries or technology capabilities they have to consider before entering into this market?
Yeah, it actually depends on what category of motors are they want to manufacture. Are they for low power applications or high power applications? That's point number one. So when you talk about the technology required to set up a motor manufacturing plant, then it's huge. First of all, you need to have the designs which you will be producing. Then you have to make dies for those designs. Then you have to have the stacking machines, vacuum impregnation systems, insulation systems, winding systems, testing systems. I think the list goes on and on. So it is a huge investment, and until and unless the volumes that they expect to sell is large, I think the break-even time would be extremely long, and it won't be a very fruitful venture. So it really depends on what volumes are they looking at and what category of machines or motors they want to manufacture. So that's my understanding on that. A motor plant is an expensive proposition, that's for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for
There's a
answering the
question.
question.
Yeah. There's a question from Kuntal. Kuntal, do you want to ask your question?
Hello, Praveen sir. Am I audible?
Hello. Yes, yes.
Yes, yes. Sir, my question is that in EV application, is it absolutely necessary to use controller for torque ripple reduction, or is there any other way we can handle it?
You see, active torque ripple reduction is a possibility. One can do that. That's a viable option. But if you get the design right, then the torque ripples won't be high. So we would like to address the problem in the design stage itself. But if it can't go beyond a certain requirement or a certain value in the design stage, then we have to go for active torque ripple control. But you see, too much of emphasis on torque ripple for EVs is not really necessary, because anyway the road surface is not very even. The road has its own undulations that creates ripples, or you can say torque ripples. So as long as your torque ripples are lower than the road undulation threshold, it's all right. It's not a problem.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Milind, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, one second. Shikhar, can you hear me?
Yes.
Actually, I'm outside, that's why I just checked it. Yeah, so Praveen, I think very nice session. So just to give background, I mean, we do make motors and inverters in our US, location. In India, we obviously have not done any work, but we are into commercial vehicle business. We do supply axles to most of our customers. Uh, so in US, we are actually working on integrating the inverter with the motors so that it becomes compact. So have you worked on that technology, or what is the trend in India on that particular front?
You see, that is on everyone's wish list, because once we go for skateboard design of the chassis, then that's the way we will have to go. And everyone would like to have an e-axle where even the battery is integrated into the entire system. So that would give a very modular structure for the vehicle design itself. So that's something which is very essential. But in India, we have to keep in mind, so far, not many OEMs are designing their vehicles from scratch. They have the vehicle design, which is predominantly, or which were designed for ICE applications with internal combustion engine, and they want to somehow adapt it to electric vehicles. So we still don't have many designs in India for the vehicles which are around the electric drivetrain. So they have the existing designs and they want to convert them into electric vehicles. So there some problems come in, because the biggest problem is the weight distribution. That how do you distribute the weight of the battery in the entire vehicle chassis? Okay, so but once we start to go towards designing the chassis platform itself for EVs, then what you say would become extremely important. And I see that's happening. It would happen in 5 years down the line. There is no other way out.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question is something coming from the power electronic side. Maybe Bikash can answer to that. Why are Indian component and technology developers so afraid about power electronic solutions? somehow we seem to be lagging behind in power electronic solution development in India, and wanted to see if you have any insights on why that is something that we are lagging behind in.
I would just say that we are lagging behind right now only because we left behind the power electronics revolution that was running behind all over the Europe around say 1970s, 80s. Right now, we do not have our own technology and any chip development, or we are not even right now not manufacturing even the devices in our country. Everything is being imported, and when we do not have the approach to look into how the devices are being operated, it's very difficult to develop a controlled converter at our end. Right now, we are just, for example, I'm just saying, we see a lot of vehicles that are running in the, and we have done operated that vehicle and seen what is inside that vehicle. Two major differences that we have seen. The vehicles that are being right now taken like from the China, they have got very high power density. They are very compact. Same like in one of the controller that we opened in our lab, we found that there were 48 switches, and the dimension was not more than 30 centimeter to 5 centimeter. So if this is supposed to be planned in India, like we plan to design that in India, I don't think like it's going to be an easy task at our end. We are looking toward approaches how we can improve the power density of converter, and also how we can improvise the control mechanism in the converters. But still, I think it's very important that we have a good view of how the devices should be selected, the component level selection. And that component level selection requires a deeper insight into the R&D of how the devices was being built. So again, back to the basic, it's all about how we gain expertise in the device side, we gain expertise in the development and manufacturing in the devices in India itself, and then we look forward to how those devices can be utilized in our sector. It's a long way to go, but this is happening in many places, I would just say. So that is my take on the question. Is it okay, or I need to focus more?
Yeah. So because again, what you are talking is very similar to what Praveen sir was talking about, the long R&D time and R&D effort which is required, and that is something that that the industry doesn't seem to be ready for. So we are more of a copy paste type of folks. Our engineering, is a lot of copy paste and very little of originality, and that I think comes to the deficiency point. Praveen sir, you want to add something to this?
Yeah, so actually, one thing which I have experienced is that engineering design is more of an art. Okay, so there is no concrete mathematical formulation which will guarantee the success of it. And to develop the know why, which I have been stressing since long time, we need to fail a lot. And once we fail a lot, we learn what not to do, which is much more important than what to do. Okay, and that needs time, that needs patience, and that needs an appetite for risk. Now, having said that, the other biggest problem which I can say from my experience as an educator is that our curriculum is extremely flawed. If you look at the curriculum of motors, power electronics, drives, and so on, it's full of obsolete things. Okay, things which people don't even use anymore, maybe which were used 20, 30 years back, we still teach them. And that's why the young engineers who graduate are not up to the mark, or they are not aware of the state of the art of the technology. The second problem that we have in our education is lack of focus on labs. Somehow labs have been relegated to a back seat. It's more on simulations. Simulations can do only so much, because until and unless you really develop some system, you won't know how it would fail, where it would fail, what can be done to make it better. So actually the problem is deep rooted. It has to go right to the point of updating, redefining the curriculum, and also the challenge doesn't stop there. From where to get people who will teach that. So I think that's where we need a lot of collaboration with the industry experts as well, so that they also start to contribute in the teaching in universities and colleges, and they also put their voice in curriculum formation stage as well. So it has to be a mutual collaboration, otherwise we won't be out of this problem in near future.
Okay, you bring a very valid point, Dr. Praveen. There is a question again on the power electronic side. Uh, how do we see the role of supercapacitor for electric vehicles in India? And maybe that also helps in the regeneration to a certain increase the regeneration percentage. But any thoughts, Dr. Praveen? Are you actively doing anything with supercapacitors?
Yeah, we have investigated the use of supercapacitors, and that was actually for a very different kind of an application. So we thought that if we have a city bus which has frequent stops, there are bus stops after every kilometer or even less than a kilometer. So if we can convert every bus stop into a flash charging station as well. So instead of having a heavy battery pack, we can have supercapacitors. So by the time people get in and get off the bus, the supercapacitor can be charged using flash charge. It will have enough energy for another 4 or 5 kilometers, but would encounter another bus stop much before that. So it will keep on charging and keep on driving. So virtually the range anxiety won't be an issue. So for such kind of applications, supercapacitors are good. Supercapacitors are good if our battery capacities are lower. If we have a 3 kilowatt hour battery application or 4 kilowatt hour battery application, which would be normally the upper range for two-wheelers. So in that case, we can have supercapacitors. So whenever we want to accelerate from a stop condition, then supercapacitor takes off. Whenever we are at more or less a constant speed range, the battery takes over. So we keep switching between the supercapacitor and the battery depending on the drive requirement. So, but for big vehicles like buses, if they have a huge battery pack, then supercapacitors don't make sense because the battery itself has such a large capacity that it can provide any of the peak torque. It can also absorb a lot of regenerative energy. So it really depends on what is the size of the battery that we are looking at. So that's our analysis so far.
So there has to be a very strong cost benefit analysis to be done along with it if we want to incorporate it.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a question from William. William, you can ask your question.
Good afternoon, Sam. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes, if you were to develop an autonomous vehicle based off an differential drive platform, and instead of using encoders at your motors, is it possible to control the attitude of the vehicle entirely based on an IMU with an external reference as a camera that keeps correcting your reference points? So is that possible?
Theoretically, it's possible. Definitely. That's possible. But since we have not worked with autonomous vehicles, so I can't say what kind of algorithms would go in, but theoretically it's possible.
But the control like yaw, like is that
Yeah.
like just possible just your IMU?
That I won't be able to comment, I'm sorry. I really won't be able to comment on that.
No problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. One of the things, again, on the power electronics, the base element today, there is a lot of talk into what is the right solution. Vikas, can you talk more about MOSFET versus IGBT and from a price perspective as well as implementation perspective, what do you think is the best fit for like this 300 volt to 400 volt segment, which is there in the passenger car?
So just right to the basics, I would say MOSFETs are suitable for high frequency application and medium power application. IGBT are suitable for high current and low voltage application. So these two are one of the most used devices right now in industry. So if you are going with around 300 to 400 volt and high current application, IGBT would be a good choice. But when we look for applications above 600 volts, MOSFET would be the right choice. Apart from these two devices, I would like to comment on the other devices that are right now coming in the market. That's the GaN-based and silicon carbide based devices. Those devices are running on high frequency around 1 megahertz. They are being switched. So switching at high frequency has its own advantages. The harmonics in the overall system will reduce. At the same time, the losses in the whole overall system that we have been discussing all around, that is also going to be reduced. So apart from IGBT and MOSFET, I would just right now the trending thing would be the GaN. And recently, a few companies in Europe have previously the GaN was limited to around 650 volts. Right now, I would see that companies in Europe have worked out with a solution of up to 1,200 volts of GaN device, GaN, and at the same time, the packaging, the power density that we are expecting from the conventional MOSFET and IGBT devices, that also can be improvised a lot because the filter sizes are going to be reduced. So IGBT and MOSFET are a good recommendation, but if somebody would like to start with a new thing, then I would suggest look for possibilities for using GaN and silicon carbide based devices. We have example in our lab. Previously, we have a drivetrain setup, and it was a huge one, and it just was a 3 kilowatt inverter, 3 kVA inverter that was designed. And right now we have a similar size, which is taking care of around 25 kVA. It is a silicon carbide based devices that we have used in the design. So a lot of technological advances in the power semiconductor devices itself is going on. So somewhere around, yeah, we can look into it.
So here's a question. Thiru, just one question before you ask. So because interestingly, I would say a lot of two-wheeler manufacturers or these importers in India don't even know what sort of power electronics is being used in the motor controller that they are putting on their vehicles. And what are your thoughts on their ability to estimate the overall efficiency of the vehicle when they are not even aware of the nature of the power electronics being used?
The secret, sir, this is something I would say that whenever, as a customer, when I buy a inverter from a market or a power supply from a market, I look into what are the devices that are being used in the component level. I just don't buy the devices that meets my requirement. So I would say that if somebody in the any sector working and finding out a specific converter that meets the requirement, it should not be just the converter whole setup. They should be looking on system level. They should also be looking into the device level. For example, if somebody buys a MOSFET, the MOSFET has an internal resistance of around 14 milliohm. But when we go with the GaN devices, it's around 2 to 3 milliohm. So I/O losses in that MOSFET device and the GaN devices, that losses is going to be reduced a lot. So whenever we look for any design of a converter, or we look for purchasing any predefined setup of powertrain from the market, I would suggest that kindly look into the specific component level design as well, how it is going to operate and what is operating frequency and all. So that will help to take forward some steps, actually deeper steps, to actually investigate the claims of the design that has been put forwarded to you as a customer. So that would be a verification at your end as well, and at the same time you would be able to verify if that particular converter is applicable to be used at your application as well. It's just not that something was purchased. Something which is applicable for you as well is being verified at your end.
Okay. Yeah, Thiru, you can ask your question.
Thanks, Shekhar. Sorry for the interruption. Vikash, very good. You mentioned that for higher currents, IGBTs are used and then MOSFETs are used in other places. But I know from the two-wheeler industry, the controllers are all using MOSFETs
Yes.
today. And I'd like to understand why. Is it just cost-driven? And then you also mentioned SiC can switch at higher frequencies, which indicates maybe you can achieve much better control and therefore improve efficiencies and ride comfort. And then GaN may have lower losses. Is it cost and availability that is preventing the industry from going towards that? What is your view?
It's the cost right now, as well as the voltage and the current level that we have right now with the GaN. GaN, to a matter of fact, was introduced around 2000 after 2010, and after that, till date, 2 to 3 months back, it was limited to 600 volts itself. So when we were looking for high voltage application, it was very obvious that people would not be going with the GaN unless they connect them in series or parallel configuration to meet the requirement. So same thing would happen like with the MOSFET as well. We just want to replace the existing MOSFET with the new type of switching devices. And right now, if we look with the packaging of the switching device, like devices, MOSFETs are basically, if we go with the SMD, then they have D2 PKL type packaging. And when we look into TO247 packaging, it's most widely used because it's very easy to provide the cooling mechanism in that. So I think it's the cost as well as the some technological advancement that is right now to be done at the GaN and SiC side that is actually driving things back to be acceptable in the wider universe of utilizing power electronics converters, like these devices in the power electronics converters. And
what is the
there is requirement to like to increase the manufacturing capacity of this GaN as well. There are only few companies you can find, United Semiconductor and 2 to 3 more are there, which are actually manufacturing this silicon carbide based devices. It's not the every company that is right now manufacturing. So this is like, I think the causes.
Silicon carbide can be at higher frequencies. Does it also mean the efficiencies are better?
Yes, sir, obviously at higher frequency, and their internal resistance is also very low.
Okay, thank you.
Here, I would also like to add that higher efficiency for silicon carbide doesn't just increase the efficiency of the converters itself, but the output voltage waveform that you get will be more close to sinusoidal waveform, and that tends to increase the efficiency of the motor as well. So for the motor also, it's beneficial to have higher switching efficiency frequency.
Right.
So, thanks, Thiru. Praveen sir, right now, I'm coming back to what we discussed. You talked about the fact that the electric vehicle is not a single point application. Now, at the same time, we have motor companies which are just advertising they have a 95% efficient motor and trying to sell the motor. And then we have novice two-wheeler manufacturers who are entering new into this mobility field, and they are just going by that single point of 95%, putting it on the vehicle, and then they are expecting the vehicle to give 95% efficiency.
Yeah.
Right. So, and obviously there is very little simulation done because there is no data for doing the simulation. So where, as you said, this is something like first principles, which have to be learned in your 9 standard physics and 10 standard physics and, through your engineering. How can we get common sense going in this regard? Because then there is always this comparison that uh, electric vehicles are going to be such a big advance in efficiency over the conventional vehicles, whereas when we get down to the paper, it is we are comparing 32% to 70% and not 32% to 97%. So what's your thoughts on this?
I think the only solution is that we should be having more of such events where we call more people and we try to educate them. And see, that's a question which has bothered me for a long time, that how can we reach out to the wider audience? Again, my answer comes back to the education itself. For example, we seriously need courses on systems engineering. Now, systems engineering is something which is never taught in undergraduate or in postgraduate courses. Okay, and until and unless a person does a systems engineering course, he or she won't have a proper idea of how to make a qualified judgment and what are the questions that they need to ask to the vendors. So if they claim a certain number, what exactly does it mean? In what operating conditions are those numbers valid? So we really need to have a lot of series of seminars, webinars to educate these young companies that what they should be looking at and what are the basic calculations that they should be doing so that they get their product configuration correct. I don't see any other way out. It's a long process, but that's the only way.
So I'll come back to that. Rajendra sir wants to add a few thoughts. Rajendra sir.
No, sir. It was by mistake. I raised the hand.
Okay. Okay. So Praveen sir, and maybe we can follow up later on a wider discussion, on a specific discussion. Would IIT Guwahati be interested in hosting a electric motor development boot camp, 6 months type of program, which would cover some of these things that we are talking about? And I'm sure there are a lot of motor development and tier one and controller development companies who would really be interested in taking that up. Is this something that would interest you, or
Yeah, the answer to this question is that we have made a blueprint of something which would be beneficial to the entire automobile industry in India, including the OEMs, tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers and startups. So it's not just about a boot camp, but we are planning to set up an entire center where fundamental questions and basic development can be done. And we are talking about developing technology from TRL4 to TRL7. A blueprint of that is ready. The only trouble right now we have is the finance, because to set up something like that needs money, and the industry has to come forward to pitch in the money so that we can have a collaborative platform which can help everyone at the end of the day, so that the entire technology development in the country can reach the next level and we can compete with the best in the world. So we are interested in that. It's much beyond what you are talking about, just a boot camp. It's a complete technology development center that we want to have, or we want to establish.
Fair. So I think there are few industry members here, and on behalf of Gyaniki also, I would like to ask them to consider this opportunity to take a wider discussion up with IIT Guwahati and see where there can be a win-win situation, because today the motor and motor controller are things that this industry is struggling with. There is not a India ready solution which meets the expectations of the customer. There is no such solution out there. we are working with something that is coming from here and there, and I hope that something really moves ahead on this side as well. So that is there. One question, Praveen sir, is from Rushi Raj. He's asking if what is the process of selection and taking up PhD with IIT Guwahati, and what is the time period of admissions and typical process?
Our admission interviews are usually held in the month of May or early June and in the month of December. So we take admissions twice, and all the details are flashed on the IIT Guwahati website. So Rishi Raj can really keep visiting the IIT Guwahati website. So next advertisements will come sometimes in September or early October, and then he can plant you outside.
Okay. There's a question from Sujay to the larger audience, probably the industry members who are here, and if they want to give a personal opinion on this question. Sujay is asking how much premium would the industry be ready to pay above Chinese prices for a Indian motor solution?
This is Thiru from Ampere. I think Professor had done a fantastic job of highlighting a huge opportunity. I do not know if everybody recognizes this. Today, your biggest cost element in the two-wheeler, which the industry that I represent, is the battery. And for the efficiency losses, you just heard that the efficiencies are 60 to 70% at best. We are looking at more close to 60% than 70%. And to compensate for that, you end up adding a lot more battery. So if you can make a motor that is a lot more efficient, you'd find that there is opportunity for people to pay a premium, a reasonable premium, because you'll be saving that on the battery. Big opportunity. Go for it.
Thiru, that's a very good point. But today, this number of 60 or 62 or whatever the real world is giving is limited to the knowledge of the OEM. A component developer per se doesn't have the bandwidth of doing the complete end application testing. And most of the motor developers that I've seen and I've come across in India, they are stuck after the initial prototype and lab level testing. After that, they don't have any funds of going anywhere further. Right. So any thoughts that you have on this and any experience that you have?
Very good point. What we have done is we have spent our funds, and it looks like IIT Guwahati has also developed what is called the Indian, we have developed what's called an Ampere drive cycle, because the so-called Indian drive cycle used by RI is not representative. So we have this information for people who sign an NDA with us, especially motor manufacturers. We'll give it readily to them, and we'll tell them where our customers are driving on the map of torque RPM profile. We give a profile on the occurrence where our customers are spending a lot of their time when they're driving a typical drive cycle. We'll share that information readily. There is we try to hold the information because we have invested and developed that. But I think over time, this is all going to be readily available to everybody. And if IIT Guwahati has developed that, it's going to be readily available to people. So we can share this information, and running a test on a dynamometer emulating this drive cycle has been done. We have gone to GARC in Chennai, and we have done this test emulating this. It comes pretty close to our efficiency and kilowatts per kilometer on the road. So we have done our work matching that, and we're very, very confident that we understand the drive cycle now. It's available. With the dynamometer, you can do it.
Yeah. Thanks, Thiru. Praveen sir, you want to add something?
Yeah, so we also developed the drive cycle for two-wheelers, and actually Rajendra did that in the year 2017. So he drove around Guwahati city on different days at different hours of the time, measuring the speeds and so on. And from there we extracted the drive cycle. So all that is doable. And to answer this question which you raised about the companies trying to develop motors or converters or even BMS systems and they get stuck after some lab level testing is precisely the point which we want to answer or help with the center that we are planning, okay, where people can come in with their questions, they can get answers to their questions, they can develop their technology to the next level. So up to lab level is what we call as TRL4, and then they can come here, work, and then go up to TRL7, which is almost ready to be deployed in real world scenario. So we need such a collaborative center, and it has to be a collaborative effort to put it in place.
Exactly. Point noted. So we have a few last couple of questions, or 3-4 questions that we can take right now. One question I have for Vikas on the charger side of things. Because what is your thoughts on this low cost AC charger that is being talked about? And do you think that that is something that can meet the overall requirements from the charging infrastructure that we talk about?
Okay.
Because
yeah,
go ahead.
So when we talk about chargers at AC chargers, basically, so we are expecting that from grid we will be directly powering up the vehicle to charge, and that is how the AC chargers are being thought to be the simplest way to be deployed. And at the same time, we forget about the isolation that we should be having from the grid when we charge the vehicle with the AC. So I would just say that AC charging standards are already there, and it's limited to up to 19.2 kilowatt level. So if we are looking for applications below that, basically in the two-wheeler segment and three-wheeler segments, which are not that power consuming. So this might be a good solution with a condition that we ensure that the standards of the grid standards as well as the charging standards both are being met by the AC. If that is not being met, then I would suggest that AC chargers are not something which should be widely used, because when we go with the DC chargers, it's a converter side already converts from AC to DC, and within before that we have some isolation as well, and the filters ensure that the harmonics that is being taken from the load side. Load side is the battery. It's a nonlinear load. It's going to inject a lot of harmonics in the grid back. So that can also be reduced. So something around AC chargers is suitable only when we look for the low power application. But when we go with the high power, it's the DC fast chargers that we have to look on.
Yeah.
So maybe around the home driving, like the Toto and all that we see around, AC chargers can be a good solution because that's going to be cheap as well. We are avoiding some set of conversion at the charging side. So that has to be added in the vehicle end. So maybe the chargers will become quite cheap at that point. So for wider application in the low power EVs, obviously AC chargers may be a good choice.
Yeah, thanks, Vikas. Any questions from the audience? Anything remaining that you would like to ask? You can go ahead right now. Sujay, Sabha, if you want to ask your questions.
Hello.
Yeah, Sabha, go ahead.
Yeah. Good afternoon. So, my name is Sabha. Right now, I have a concern regarding an application in belt start generators. I have seen similar applications developed by multiple manufacturers. In all of these applications, which has a typical power rating of 25 kilowatt and a 48 volt, most of the solutions are liquid cooled. Is there any other solution possible for such a inverter application for BSG belt start generators?
I think liquid cooling is done to keep the size smaller. So you are willing to compromise on the size, then go for forced air. So that's not a problem. So it's all because of size. So if you want a more compact design, you need to go for liquid cooling. There's no other way out. If you are okay with a bigger size, then one can easily go for forced air cooling. That would be my answer to the question.
Okay. Any other questions? We can take last two questions before we call it a day.
Okay, hi, Sujoy here. So first of all, Praveen sir and IIT Guwahati team, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, Praveen sir and IIT Guwahati team, I really appreciate the work you have put into EVs, and I really appreciate the pioneering position that you have taken into researching on this entire thing. And most of all, I loved your comment on Jugaad, which is a crime for proper high-level, engineering and manufacturing in India. So I was wondering if you could just share some comments or thoughts on the IIT Guwahati startup incubation cell. Is that linked with your EV technical design, this thing, and is there some kind of co-work that can happen if a startup wishes to work with IIT Guwahati and both contribute and learn? Thank you.
Yeah, co-work. Thank you for the question. So co-work is possible, but our startup incubation center is not focused to EVs. It's a general incubation center, and so far there are no startups which work in the EV space. But yes, co-working is always possible. We always look forward to collaborations with startups, with OEMs, with tier 1 suppliers, with anyone who is interested in this area. That's always feasible.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you.
Okay, we can take one last question. Okay, I think we have satisfied everyone with the question and answer.
I have one question.
Okay, go ahead.
If one has to formulate the drive cycle for some area or some particular city, what is the procedure and how to start building that?
Oh, first is that you get the vehicle for which you want to get the drive cycle, and the rule of the thumb is that you should invest at least, if not more, at least 2 to 3 weeks of continuous driving every day, and you have to break down the day into different segments like early morning hours, late morning, early afternoon, evening, and so on. You keep measuring the speed profiles. If you don't have proper GPS equipment, then maybe you can even get a good smartphone with a nice app, so even that would do the job. So once you get all the measured data points, you can start building up the drive cycle. So there are standard techniques available for that, how to filter it, how to extract the operating points, and so on. So all that is very fairly formalized. So you can get a rudimentary drive cycle by, not rudimentary actually, it would be quite good as well if you can measure for 3 weeks continuously every day at different hours of the day, and to ensure that you have at least 2 or 3 sample vehicles, because different drivers will have different driving styles, so you would even capture that. So at best it's a 6 weeks of human resource that you would have to put in. 2 people, 3 weeks, everyday driving. So I think it's possible. It's not a very expensive affair.
Professor, this is Thiru.
Yeah.
What we also
Yeah.
found is torque has an important variable also. So we had to invest in measuring torque and putting in good sensors and put in a certain data acquisition system in the vehicle. So speed is much easier, but the torque is where we had some trouble and we had to invest quite a bit of effort in that.
In case a startup, if it doesn't have enough resources, then they would actually know the parameters of their vehicle. So torque, they can calculate from the model.
Sure.
That would give a fair idea of what's happening.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, the torque does seem to affect the efficiency.
Yeah. Oh yes. Torque at what speed is the key?
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Yeah. And people will claim 85% efficiency in a hub motor or something like that at a very high speed at full torque. Once I reach high speed, where am I running at full throttle? I'm not going anywhere.
I mean, those numbers are on the brochures of the motor manufacturers are very, very misleading.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. I should sign off. I really appreciate this session.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for joining in. And see, we have been talking for years and years about this industry academia bridge, and we feel proud that we have been playing some role by this session to have a very good interaction between the research lab at IIT Guwahati and the industry members. So we thank for everyone who joined from obviously both the sides. And Praveen sir, we think with the interactions we have had, we think we'll be continuously be linked with you in one way or the other. So you will keep seeing my emails for more talks and discussions and industry interactions. So
definitely, I would love to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So any parting words, Praveen sir?
So first of all, I would like to thank Janki for this platform. It has been really a wonderful experience talking to people, trying to answer their questions. It has been a learning experience for us as well. So thank you very much for organizing this.
Okay, thanks everyone, and please make sure you have a good lunch after this. Don't miss out on that. So and have a nice weekend. Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.